A kind teenager's simple favor, helping an elderly neighbor with a hard-to-reach light bulb, leads to something much bigger. When she shows up the next day with a police officer, Chris learns the true power of kindness and how one small act can change both their lives forever. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It was another lazy afternoon in the quiet suburbs where Chris lived. The golden rays of the setting sun filtered through the leaves of the trees lining Maple Street, casting long shadows on the pavement. Chris loved moments like this, cruising through the neighborhood on his bike, feeling the breeze rustling his hair, and waving at familiar faces as he passed by. But today, something caught his eye that made him slow down. Mrs. Garcia, his elderly neighbor, was standing on her front porch, squinting up at the light fixture by her door. She looked frustrated, almost defeated. Chris stopped his bike and looked closer. The bulb in the porch light had burned out, and Mrs. Garcia was holding a new one in her hand, but she didn't seem able to reach it. The ladder next to her wasn't tall enough, and it was clear she wasn't sure what to do next. Mrs. Garcia had always been kind to Chris. She was one of those neighbors who seemed to always have cookies baking in the oven, ready to offer to anyone who passed by. But recently, he'd noticed she wasn't out in her garden as much, and the usual vibrancy in her eyes seemed to have dimmed. He couldn't just ride by. "Hey, Mrs. Garcia, need some help?" Chris called out, hopping off his bike and walking toward her. She looked up, startled at first, but then smiled warmly when she saw him. "Oh, Chris, you're such a sweet boy. I didn't want to trouble anyone, but this old porch light, I just can't seem to get to it anymore. My ladder's too short, and I'm not as steady on my feet as I used to be." Chris nodded, understanding her hesitation. He'd seen his grandparents struggle with similar tasks before. "It's no trouble at all, Mrs. Garcia. My dad has a taller ladder I can grab. I'll be back in a minute." Mrs. Garcia gave him a grateful smile, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "You're such a good boy, Chris." "Thank you." Chris dashed back home, grabbed the taller ladder from his dad's garage, and returned to Mrs. Garcia's house. When he arrived, she was waiting patiently by the porch, still holding the replacement bulb. "You didn't have to rush, dear. I've lived with this light being out for days," she said with a chuckle. "I could have waited a bit longer." Chris smiled as he set up the ladder under the porch light. "Better to get it done now, Mrs. Garcia. No reason you should be stuck in the dark when it gets late." Climbing up the ladder, Chris unscrewed the old, burnt-out bulb and carefully screwed in the new one. He twisted it just right until, with a satisfying click, the porch lit up again. Warm, golden light flooded the steps, making Mrs. Garcia's small front yard feel cozy and inviting once more. "There, all fixed," Chris said, climbing down and wiping his hands on his jeans. Mrs. Garcia's face lit up as brightly as the porch light. "Oh, Chris, you've no idea how much that helps me. I've been so nervous about falling off that ladder. You saved me a lot of trouble." She reached out and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "You're always welcome to ask for help," Chris replied. "Don't hesitate to call me if something like this comes up again." Mrs. Garcia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You know, it's the small things like this that I find harder to do these days. Ever since my Henry passed, well, everything seems a little more difficult." Chris's heart sank. He had heard about her late husband, Henry, who had been a police officer in the neighborhood for many years. Mrs. Garcia often spoke of him with deep admiration. And now, standing there in front of her, Chris could see how much she still missed him. "I'm really sorry, Mrs. Garcia," Chris said softly. "It must be hard." Mrs. Garcia nodded, her eyes misting over. "It is, but having young people like you around gives me hope. My Henry would have loved you, Chris. He was always helping people, just like you did today." The comment caught Chris off guard. He didn't think of himself as someone doing anything extraordinary, just helping out a neighbor. But the sincerity in Mrs. Garcia's voice made him feel like what he'd done meant more than just fixing a light bulb. "I'm happy to help, really," Chris said, a little embarrassed but deeply touched by her words. Mrs. Garcia smiled again, this time with a twinkle in her eye. "Why don't you come inside for a bit? I just made a fresh batch of oatmeal cookies this morning. It's the least I can do to thank you." Chris's face lit up at the mention of cookies. "I'd love that, Mrs. Garcia, thank you." He followed her inside the cozy house. It smelled like cinnamon and sugar, the familiar scent of Mrs. Garcia's baked goods filling the air. She motioned for Chris to sit at the small kitchen table while she bustled around, pulling out a plate of warm cookies and a glass of cold milk. As Chris bit into the soft, gooey cookie, he couldn't help but grin. "These are amazing, Mrs. Garcia. You're the best baker in the neighborhood." Mrs. Garcia chuckled as she sat down across from him. "Thank you, dear. Baking keeps me busy, keeps my hands moving. I used to bake for Henry all the time, but, well, it's been quieter around here without him." Chris didn't know what to say, but he felt a deep sense of empathy for her. He had never lost someone close, but he could see that even after all this time, Henry's absence weighed heavily on her. The two sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, just enjoying the cookies and the warmth of the kitchen. Then Mrs. Garcia started sharing stories about her life with Henry, their adventures when they were younger, his dedication as a police officer, and how much he had loved their neighborhood. As Mrs. Garcia spoke, Chris listened intently. He realized that she wasn't just lonely for company. She was lonely for the life she had shared with her husband, for the sense of purpose she felt when they were together. The next day, Chris was sitting at the kitchen table at home, working on his homework, when there was a knock at the front door. He looked up, not thinking much of it, but when he opened the door, his heart skipped a beat. Standing on his front porch was Mrs. Garcia, and next to her was a tall police officer in uniform. "Mrs. Garcia, officer, what's going on?" Chris asked, his voice shaking with confusion. His mind raced. Why would Mrs. Garcia bring a cop to his house? Had he done something wrong? Had something happened to her? "Chris, don't worry, you're not in any trouble," Mrs. Garcia said quickly, sensing his panic. "I just needed to come by and talk to you about something important." The police officer, who had a kind smile, nodded. "I'm Officer Ramirez. Mrs. Garcia asked me to come along. There's nothing to be concerned about." Chris's heart was still pounding as he stepped aside and let them in. His parents, who had overheard the conversation, came out of the kitchen, exchanging curious glances as they greeted the officer and Mrs. Garcia. Once they were all seated in the living room, Mrs. Garcia looked at Chris, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Chris, I wanted to tell you that what you did for me yesterday, changing that light bulb, well, it was more than just a favor. It meant more to me than I can put into words." Chris blinked, unsure of what to say. "It was just a light bulb, Mrs. Garcia. I was happy to help." She shook her head. "It wasn't just a light bulb, dear. It was the fact that you took the time to help me when I was feeling so alone. You reminded me of Henry. He was always there for people, always helping whenever he could. You have that same kindness, Chris." Mrs. Garcia took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out an envelope from her purse. "I went to the police station today because I wanted to do something to honor Henry's memory. And after talking with Officer Ramirez here, I realized the best way to do that was to help someone who has the same heart that Henry had. That's why I've set up a small college fund for you, Chris." Chris stared at her, speechless. Mrs. Garcia's voice shook with emotion. It's not much, but it's enough to get you started when the time comes. Henry would have wanted me to support someone like you, someone who looks out for others." Officer Ramirez spoke up. "Mrs. Garcia told me all about how you've been helping her, Chris. It's a rare thing to find such a kind young man these days. You remind her a lot of her husband, and that's something worth honoring." Chris's throat felt tight, and he struggled to find the right words. "Mrs. Garcia, I don't know what to say. I just wanted to help you with the light bulb." Tears welled up in Mrs. Garcia's eyes. "You've done so much more than that, Chris. You've given me hope again. I feel like I have family close by, and that's something I haven't felt in a long time." Chris's parents, who had been listening quietly, exchanged glances. His mom wiped a tear from her eye, and his dad put a hand on Chris's shoulder. "We're so proud of you, son," his dad said softly. "You didn't just fix a light. You showed someone that they're not alone." Chris, overwhelmed by the moment, stood up and walked over to Mrs. Garcia. She opened her arms and he hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. I'll make sure I use this to do something good, just like Henry would have wanted." From that day on, Chris's visits to Mrs. Garcia's house became a regular part of his routine. After school, he'd stop by to check on her, help her with little things around the house, and listen to more stories about Henry and their life together. Mrs. Garcia, in turn, started baking more than ever. Her home became a warm, welcoming place for Chris, where the smell of cookies filled the air, and there was always a story to share. The bond between them grew deeper, turning into something more like family. Sometimes, a small act of kindness can have ripple effects far beyond what we expect. Chris thought he was just helping with a light bulb, but it turned into a life-changing experience for both him and Mrs. Garcia. Have you ever helped someone and realized later how much it meant to them? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I have more heartwarming stories like this coming your way. Black boy kicked off flight by air hostess, not knowing who his father is. He never asked for trouble, yet trouble seemed to follow him everywhere. On the cusp of his 14th birthday, Malik Evans stood at the check-in counter of Westbound Airlines, clutching a backpack that looked too large for his slight frame. Despite the anxious flutter in his stomach, he tried to smile at the clerk scanning his boarding pass. Something about traveling alone, with no one to rely on but himself, always made him uneasy. Still, he had promised his mother he would be on his best behavior. When the air hostess behind the desk arched a brow at him, he wondered if he had done something wrong already. Malik's mother had told him over breakfast that morning, "Focus on your studies when you get to Grandma's. Don't cause any scenes, and remember I love you." The memory of her gentle admonishment lingered in his mind. He missed her already, though he'd only just left her side. He wondered if she was anxious for him, too. It was the first time he'd be flying without her. His mother had reasoned that it was important for him to build self-confidence, but in the small lines of her face, he had glimpsed how worried she truly felt. He handed over his ticket, forcing another bright smile. The air hostess hardly responded. She brushed him off with a quick remark about how unaccompanied minors need extra procedures. The next 5 minutes passed in a blur, with Malik trying to follow the directions about where to wait and how to proceed once the gate opened. Nearby, a few other children around his age were gathered, talking in hushed voices. Malik attempted to catch their eyes, hoping for some companionship, but they seemed lost in their own excitement or fear. At the final checkpoint, the same air hostess appeared again, her polished shoes clicking against the glossy airport floor. She peered down at Malik, looked him over from head to toe, then sighed, as if annoyed by his existence. "You're traveling alone?" she asked, her tone clipped. Malik nodded quietly, trying not to let her cold demeanor unnerve him. He thought he'd done nothing at all to deserve this suspicion. Yet something in her eyes suggested she already disapproved of him. "Do you have any identification besides your boarding pass?" she asked. Malik fumbled in his pocket. His mother had given him a small ID card. His hand shook slightly as he handed it to her. She examined it, then offered a tight-lipped smile. When she finally waved him on board, Malik felt relief wash over him. He walked down the jet bridge, heart pounding, determined not to give anyone any trouble. Inside the plane, every seat looked identical. Neat rows, overhead bins shut tight, travelers stowing small bags under the seats. Malik located his spot next to an older man reading a novel with the cover folded back. The man barely acknowledged Malik's presence, which suited Malik just fine. He wasn't sure he wanted to talk to anyone anyway, but he couldn't help noticing that across the aisle sat a family of 4, the parents smiling warmly at each other while their 2 toddlers bounced in their seats. It sparked an ache inside him. For as long as he could remember, it had just been him and his mother. He often wondered about his father. All he knew was that his father had disappeared before he was born. His mother refused to speak about him, shutting down every question. Malik had learned to accept the mystery, though it lingered at the edges of his mind like a puzzle, missing half the pieces. Minutes later, the air hostess from the terminal, her name tag reading Ms. Stanton, did her routine walkthrough. She stopped abruptly when she reached Malik. "You again," she murmured, eyes narrowing. "Let me see your boarding pass one more time." Malik complied, voice small. "Sure, here you go." She studied it. Unaccompanied minor, seat 14D. She glanced at the older man next to him, then glanced back at Malik with a faint frown. "I'll keep an eye on you," she said. Malik swallowed, unsure how to respond. Her tone made him feel like he was on the verge of committing some unknown infraction. She moved on, fussing at a passenger who was adjusting his carry-on, then instructing someone else to buckle up. The overhead announcements crackled, reminding everyone about safety procedures. Malik tried to calm the jitters in his stomach, thinking that once the flight was in the air, everything would settle down. But when the plane began taxiing, Miss Stanton strode down the aisle with a stern look. She paused again at Malik. "Is there a problem?" Malik asked softly, heart pounding in confusion. She ignored his question, instead turning to the older man next to him. "Sir, do you know this boy?" she asked. The man looked surprised and shook his head. Malik stared at Ms. Stanton, baffled, but she offered no explanation. "I'll be right back," she said, pivoting briskly. The plane stopped moving. Moments later, Mrs. Stanton returned with another flight attendant and a security officer. Malik's pulse raced. The older man gave him a concerned look, but said nothing. "I need you to come with me," Ms. Stanton ordered. Her voice carried a tension that made the surrounding passengers turn their heads. Malik felt panic rise in his chest. "But why?" She pursed her lips. "There's an issue with your documentation. We'll straighten it out off the plane." Security guided him toward the exit. Confused whispers followed. The family across the aisle stared in shock, and one of the toddlers burst into frightened tears. Malik managed to glance at their concerned faces before being led back up the jet bridge. The moment felt surreal, like a nightmare. He wondered if he'd done something so terrible that he was being removed from the flight. All he'd done was take his seat quietly. At the gate, the airline supervisor, Ms. Stanton, and another staff member huddled in conversation. Malik stood a few feet away, his hands trembling at his sides. He tried to piece together what was happening. Racial bias was a topic that teachers at school had talked about, but he never expected to confront it so openly in an airport. He watched Miss Stanton's expression. Her mouth set in a grim line. She finally addressed Malik. "We're going to have to recheck your ticketing information. Something seems off." Malik glanced at the supervisor, whose eyes momentarily flickered with discomfort. It was as if he recognized how unfair this ordeal was but couldn't find a suitable solution. An uneasy silence fell over the small group. "Please wait here," the supervisor said. "We're making some calls." Malik slumped into a plastic seat near the gate, hugging his backpack to his chest. Passengers from the flight were craning their necks through the open doorway, some murmuring to each other. He heard snatches of conversation. "So young. What did he do? That's awful." He tried not to listen. He tried to stay calm, focusing on the buzzing overhead lights, the whir of airport machinery, anything to drown out the knot of fear in his stomach. Eventually, a security guard approached and spoke gently. "We're trying to figure this out, kid. Don't worry. It's probably just a misunderstanding." But Malik felt the burning weight of injustice pressing on him. Why him? Why was this happening? He forced himself to breathe in and out slowly, recalling his mother's last words. "Stay calm. Don't cause a scene." Still, he couldn't shake the bitterness that rose in his throat. No one else had been singled out. No one else was being pulled off a plane for mysterious reasons. In the background, Ms. Stanton mentioned something about lack of proper guardianship. Malik heard her say, "He could be lying about who he's traveling with." She glanced in Malik's direction, her eyes critical and suspicious. Time dragged on, with each minute feeling heavier than the last. Malik's flight took off without him. He could see the plane taxiing away through the glass windows. He watched it fade into the sky, and for a moment, tears stung the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back. He refused to cry in front of these people. Finally, the supervisor returned. "We confirmed that your mother purchased this ticket legitimately," he said. "But we're having trouble verifying your father's information. Your passenger form is missing details about your paternal guardian." Malik swallowed. He didn't even know his father's name. When filling out the form earlier online, his mother had just left the father's section blank. This detail had never been a problem before. He traveled once when he was younger, and no one had questioned anything. "If you don't have a father in the picture," Ms. Stanton said sharply, "why did you list that you were meeting a guardian at your destination?" Malik's eyes widened. "I'm meeting my grandmother," he said. "She's my mother's mother. I don't have a father to meet. That part of the form must have... My mom said we didn't need that line because we just left it blank." Ms. Stanton's mouth thinned. "This is irregular. We need to speak with your mother." Malik dug out his phone, which was almost dead. He tried calling his mother, but the call wouldn't connect. Either she was driving or there was some issue with his signal. Panic flickered inside him. The more time passed, the more certain he became that Ms. Stanton was simply finding a reason to blame him for something. At last, the supervisor placed a call to the main westbound airlines desk, explaining the situation. Malik overheard fragments. "Yes, unaccompanied minor, lack of paternal details, no father on record." His chest tightened with a mixture of shame and anger. He knew it wasn't his fault he didn't have a father. He hated that it was now being used against him in such a public, humiliating way. After a tense wait, the supervisor turned to Malik again. "Until we clarify some details, we can't let you fly alone." Miss Stanton nodded as if she'd been justified all along. "We'll see what your mother has to say when we reach her." Malik's shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He knew better than to yell or stomp his feet, though every fiber of his being roiled with a sense of injustice. Instead, he sank back into the seat, heart thudding. He forced himself to think about the next steps, contacting his mother, explaining everything to his grandmother. Maybe the next flight, maybe a bus. He'd do whatever it took to see his grandma. But beneath those practical thoughts, a simmering question began to rise. Who was his father? And why was the absence of a father on one form enough to derail his entire trip? Did the airline suspect he was lying about having a father? Did they think he was traveling under false pretenses? The anger grew inside him like a storm cloud. 2 hours dragged by. Malik missed the flight, then the next. Ms. Stanton occasionally checked on him, but never with kindness. The supervisor left, replaced by another staffer who tried to smooth things over. The new staff member apologized for the inconvenience, offered Malik a sandwich, and explained that they were simply following protocol. Malik muttered a quiet thank you, though the apology did little to soothe him. Eventually, they managed to reach Malik's mother by phone. Her panicked voice spilled through the line. Malik could tell she was furious. "What is this nonsense?" she said. "My son had a valid ticket. I'm his mother. His father is not in the picture." She repeated that line several times, frustration clear in every syllable. Ms. Stanton's expression tightened while listening to the call. She passed the phone to the new staff member, who attempted to sound reassuring. "We understand, ma'am. Protocol demands certain details when it comes to minors traveling alone." Malik heard his mother's voice rising in anger on the other end. "I've traveled with him before. This has never been a problem." Eventually, it was settled that Malik would be allowed to board the next available flight, but Ms. Stanton insisted that someone from the airline escort him personally. The new staffer confirmed the next flight to his destination would be in 3 hours. Malik, emotionally drained, sank back in the waiting area. He would not arrive at his grandmother's until late. Yet, something in him had changed. He felt a crack in the protective shell that had allowed him to accept living without a father's identity. This ordeal had thrown his father's absence into stark relief, making him resentful that he even had to face such questions. He felt singled out, not only for having no father on record, but also, he suspected, because of the color of his skin. Why else would Ms. Stanton have targeted him so intensely? The doubt gnawed at him. While Malik waited, an older couple approached. They introduced themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Daniels. They had witnessed the incident from afar. "Are you okay, son?" asked Mr. Daniels. "We saw what happened, and we're sorry. It didn't look right." Mrs. Daniels nodded. "We're from your flight. We got rebooked too. Mechanical issues, apparently. But the way that hostess handled you—" Malik managed a tight smile. "I'm fine," he said. "Just waiting to see if they'll let me on the next plane." The couple exchanged worried glances. Mr. Daniels patted Malik's shoulder, a gentle, fatherly gesture that felt so foreign and comforting that Malik nearly burst into tears. "Stay strong," he said, "and don't let people push you around." He thanked them, warmed by their kindness. After they walked away, a swirl of thoughts flooded his mind. Why did these strangers show more concern than the people supposedly assigned to help him? His father's absence weighed heavily on him again. Maybe if his father had been around, none of this would have happened. Maybe someone would have been there to speak up for him, to demand respect. When Malik finally boarded the second flight, escorted by a younger, friendlier flight attendant, Ms. Stanton was nowhere to be seen. Relief flooded Malik's chest. But that relief soon gave way to something else, a growing determination to find out the truth about his father. Who was he? Why had he left? And most importantly, Why had his mother never told him anything? He leaned back in the seat and stared out the window at the twinkling airport lights as the plane lifted off. He resolved that once he arrived at his grandmother's, he would ask questions, real questions, until he got answers. He sensed that the mystery behind his father might hold more significance than he had ever imagined, especially if that father had left behind a name or legacy that could help explain the reaction he faced today. He felt the slow burn of anger at a society that demanded paternal details from him when those details had never been provided in his life. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, Malik's initial anger began simmering into a quiet resolve. The flight attendant brought him a soft drink and a bag of peanuts. Malik offered a polite thanks, but his mind was elsewhere. He imagined speaking to his grandmother. Did she know something his mother refused to share? He visualized it. He would stand in her living room, eyes fixed on her gently wrinkled face, and ask point-blank, "Grandma, who is my father?" The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Would she tell him the truth, or would she echo his mother's elusive replies? He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engines lull him. Memories fluttered around his mind. Memories of kids teasing him in elementary school. "Where's your dad?" Or, "You don't have a dad." They were cruel jabs, but he had always shrugged them off. Now, though it all felt more pressing, he wanted to know, needed to know. Being kicked off the flight might be the catalyst that propelled him toward answers. At last, the plane touched down hours later. Malik trudged off, feeling drained, and spotted his grandmother waiting at the arrival gate with a worried expression. She rushed to him, arms outstretched. He collapsed into her embrace, comforted by the familiar scent of her favorite lavender perfume. For a moment he forgot about the humiliations of the day. "Malik, honey," she whispered, stepping back to look at him. "What on earth happened? Your mother called me in a panic. Are you all right?" He shook his head. "I'm not sure," he said. "They kicked me off my first flight. They said something was wrong with my papers because I don't have a father listed." The last words tumbled out thick with frustration. "And that air hostess, she acted like I was some kind of criminal." His grandmother's lips tightened. "Racism is alive and well, sweetheart. I'm sorry you had to go through that." He nodded, feeling tears threaten again. "Grandma," he began softly, "I have questions about my father." She stiffened slightly, glancing around the busy terminal. Crowds of people pressed past them, some hugging relatives, others rushing for connecting flights. Her eyes seemed distant for a moment, as though remembering a difficult chapter from the past. "Let's get home first," she said gently, "and then we'll talk, okay?" He agreed, though impatience simmered within him. He wanted answers now, but he also wanted to be somewhere safe before unraveling the mystery of his father. They walked out of the airport into the cool night air. As they reached the car, Malik's grandmother kept an arm protectively around him, as if shielding him from the world's harshness. Once settled in the passenger seat, Malik pressed his forehead against the window. Streetlights whirred by, illuminating a city he only visited during holidays. A swirl of anticipation and dread filled him. He couldn't help but wonder how his grandmother would respond. Would she finally shed light on the man who had chosen not to be part of Malik's life? He remembered eavesdropping on a conversation when he was about 9. His mother had been talking to someone on the phone about child support and missing father, and she had sounded both angry and sad. Malik had tiptoed away, heart pounding, afraid of what he might overhear. He never mustered the courage to bring it up again. Now, older and scarred by a humiliating airport experience, he felt a new urgency. Maybe knowing the truth would give him some sense of identity, something to cling to when the world questioned his legitimacy. At his grandmother's house, the living room lights cast a warm glow. The cozy furniture and old photographs on the mantel gave Malik a sense of comfort. He perched on the worn-out couch, his backpack still clutched in his lap. Grandma sat in her armchair across from him, hands folded. "Okay, darling," she began softly. "I know you've got questions, and you deserve answers." Malik inhaled sharply. "I do, and I want you to be honest with me, please. Who is my father?" His grandmother hesitated, eyes flicking to a portrait on the wall. It was a family picture from years ago, Malik's mother as a teenager, his grandmother younger, and a tall man next to them. Malik recognized that man as his late grandfather. No father in sight. His grandmother sighed. "Your father was someone we never quite approved of." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "He came into your mother's life when she was barely out of high school. He was older. He made promises, grand statements about the future. But he disappeared before he could make good on any of them." Malik's eyes stayed fixed on her. "What was his name?" She pursed her lips, seeming to weigh whether to continue. "Patrick Slater," she said at last. "That was the name he gave us. But even then, we suspected it might not be his real name." Malik repeated it in his mind. Patrick Slater. It felt strange to finally have a name. Why would he lie about his name? She looked at him sadly. Because he was running from something. Or someone. "We never found out the truth. When your mother realized she was pregnant, he was long gone. We had no way of tracking him down." Malik felt conflicting emotions swirl. Relief, because now he knew a name. Anger, because if he was some sort of con man, that might explain why he abandoned his mother. And an odd sense of hope. Maybe there was more to the story. He asked, "Did my mom ever try to find him?" His grandmother's gaze dropped. "She did, for a while anyway. She was heartbroken, but she was also determined to make a life for you. She worked multiple jobs, refused to let heartbreak define her. Eventually, she accepted that Patrick was never coming back." Silence thickened between them for a moment. Malik's mind replayed the day's events, the humiliating confrontation, Miss Stanton's suspicious stare, the feeling of being singled out. He realized he was trembling slightly. He exhaled and forced his voice to stay calm. "Why did no one ever tell me?" he asked. "I mean, I understand Mom not wanting to talk about it, but I don't even know if Patrick Slater is truly my father. How can I be sure?" His grandmother looked at him with a compassion that made his chest ache. "We're not sure, honey. That's the difficult part. We only know the name he gave your mother, that's it." Malik swallowed. A flurry of questions tumbled out. Did he have a family somewhere else? Did he have money? Did he have a criminal record? Was he black, white? What was he like? Did he have a job? His grandmother placed a hand over his. "We don't know much, and that's the truth. We know he was black. We know he claimed to work in real estate, but that's all. Whenever your mother asked too many questions, he would change the subject." Malik closed his eyes. "So he might be out there, alive, not even caring that I exist." She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm so sorry." The ache in Malik's chest intensified, but also a little seed of determination began to sprout. "I want to find him," he said. I need to know who I am, and if he really is Patrick Slater, then maybe I can find out what happened. Maybe I can get closure." His grandmother nodded quietly. "I understand. But please promise me you'll be careful. We don't know what kind of man he is, or was. Malik agreed, though internally he was already forming a plan. He would do some research, maybe ask for help from people who understood how to trace missing relatives. Now that he had a name, however dubious, it was a start. The next morning, Malik's grandmother let him sleep in, sensing the emotional toll of the previous day. When he woke, he found a plate of pancakes waiting on the kitchen table. He ate slowly, thinking through 1,000 scenarios. After he finished, he found his grandmother cleaning up. He asked if they could drive around the neighborhood. He wanted to see the community library, recall old haunts from his childhood visits. As they drove through town, Malik noticed how it had changed. A few new buildings, a few old ones boarded up. He remembered fleeting moments from past summers, playing in front of the local grocery store, riding a rusted bike down the block. He asked his grandmother if there was any place that might have records or information that could help track down a person's identity. "We have the Public Records Office," she said, "and the local newspaper archives at the library. But it might be a wild goose chase, sweetheart. He might not even be from here." Malik nodded. But the craving for answers pushed him onward. He asked her to drop him at the library, promising to call if he needed a ride. She hesitated, then agreed, likely sensing his determination. Inside, the library's musty smell and hushed atmosphere embraced him. He approached the front desk, asking the librarian if they had any local archives accessible to the public. She directed him to a back room with digitalized newspapers spanning decades. Malik settled in front of a computer, scanning old headlines for the name Patrick Slater. He spent hours scrolling, eyes darting across each entry. Nothing surfaced. He tried variations: Pat Slater, P. Slater, Slater Real Estate. Still nothing of relevance. By the afternoon, he was exhausted, his eyes burning from staring at the screen. He glanced up occasionally at other patrons, a few elderly folks reading novels, some younger students studying. He sighed, logging off. Perhaps his father had never set foot in this town, or maybe he went by a different name. Malik felt the sting of disappointment, though he hadn't expected it to be easy. On his way out, a voice behind him asked, "Looking for someone?" He turned to see a girl around his age, wearing a backpack. She had curly hair piled into a messy bun. "I overheard you talking to the librarian," she said, shrugging. "I was curious." Malik found himself blushing. He hadn't expected anyone his age to pay attention. "It's my father," he admitted, then immediately wondered why he was telling a stranger. But something about her direct gaze put him at ease. She nodded. "I've never met my father either, so I get it." She introduced herself as Naomi. "I'm here a lot, mostly studying or reading. My grandmother basically raised me too." Malik felt a wave of relief to find someone who understood, even if only a little. Naomi fiddled with the straps of her backpack. "Need any help searching? I've gotten pretty good at the library system." He paused, surprised at her offer. "That would be great," he said, "but I think I've already looked through everything that might help." Naomi tilted her head. Sometimes the best clue is just talking to the right people, like old folks who might remember your father. Or if your father was into real estate, maybe city property records. People who file for business licenses or buy property appear in local databases. Malik's eyes lit up. He hadn't considered that. "That's actually a good idea." He felt a surge of hope. Naomi gave him a friendly smile, then waved goodbye, heading to her next activity. Malik left the library, catching a bus back to his grandmother's. During the ride, he thought about Naomi's suggestion. She was right. Sometimes official records could provide more than newspapers. And even if his father never owned property in this town, perhaps Malik could glean a pattern or a lead. That evening, he told his grandmother about his plan: to check property records at the municipal building. She offered to come with him, worried he might be disappointed, but Malik insisted he could do it alone. The next day, he hopped on the bus again, heading downtown. At the municipal building, he had to jump through several hoops, filling out forms and requesting public documents. The clerk seemed mildly amused by a teenager's request, but ultimately obliged. "You'll be looking at a lot of data," the clerk warned. Malik spent the day hunched over a table piled with printouts and microfilm. He learned how to scan old property deeds. He realized, with sinking realization, that many names were incomplete, or the records used abbreviations. But he kept going, page after page. As the hours crept by, his eyes blurred. Just before closing time, he stumbled on a deed from nearly 15 years ago. Someone named P. Slater had purchased a small house on Elmwood Drive. The sale had occurred around the time Malik would have been born. His heart hammered. Could it be a coincidence? He scribbled down the details. The property was no longer owned by that individual, having passed hands multiple times. But it was a clue, something to go on. Exhilarated, he left the municipal building with that slip of paper tucked safely in his backpack. That night, he barely slept. Questions swirled. Was this P. Slater truly Patrick Slater? If so, why had he bought a house here? Did his mother ever know? He wanted to call her, ask her, but part of him feared her response. She might shut down the conversation or become angry. So he decided to wait until he had something concrete. Days passed in quiet tension. Malik and his grandmother tried to maintain normal routines: grocery shopping, cooking dinner, talking about school. But the more time went by, the more restless Malik became. Meanwhile, he couldn't shake the memory of being kicked off that flight. Every time the incident crossed his mind, anger twisted in his gut. If Ms. Stanton had not singled him out, he might never have been so consumed by his father's absence. Oddly, he found himself grateful for the frustration that pushed him to find answers. At last, he convinced his grandmother to drive him to Elmwood Drive. They found the property listed on the deed: a modest gray house with a small porch and a yard filled with weeds. It looked abandoned. Mail overflowed from a rusted box, the front door plastered with notices. Clearly, no one lived there anymore. Malik's stomach tightened in disappointment. Yet he gathered his courage and approached the neighbor's house. An elderly woman answered the door. She peered at Malik suspiciously until his grandmother introduced herself, explaining that they were looking for information about a man named Slater, who might have lived next door many years ago. The neighbor's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, I remember that man. Very secretive type. Came and went at odd hours. But he was only here for a short time. Had some fancy car, used to park it out front. Then one day, he just disappeared. I think the bank foreclosed on the house." Malik felt his throat tighten. Did he mention anything about a family, or a baby on the way, anything like that? The woman shook her head. "Not that I recall, son. I'm sorry. He was polite enough, but we never really chatted. He didn't stay long. I heard he might have had trouble with the law. Never confirmed, though." She shrugged sympathetically. Malik mustered a smile and thanked her for her time. As he walked back to the car, disappointment weighed on him. His grandmother stroked his arm. "We'll keep trying, if you want," she said quietly. He looked at the house one more time, feeling the ghost of his father's presence there. It was a dead end, but also confirmation that Patrick Slater might have been real. And possibly Malik's father had vanished to avoid something or someone. Back at the house that evening, Grandma cooked a comforting meal of fried chicken and collard greens. Malik barely touched his plate. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Maybe it's time we told your mother about all this," she said. "She deserves to know you're digging into the past." Malik nodded. He dreaded the conversation, but he knew it was inevitable. He went to his room and dialed his mother's number. When she answered, her voice was filled with warmth, and he felt a pang of homesickness. After the usual niceties, he told her everything: being singled out on the plane, the humiliating experience, the name Patrick Slater, the abandoned house, the municipal records. She fell silent for a long moment. At last, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Malik, I'm sorry you're going through all this. I didn't want you hurt by the same man who hurt me." "I understand, Mom," Malik said softly, "but I need to know for myself." She took a shaky breath. "All right, I'll tell you what I can. I was 19 when I met him. I thought he was the world. Charming, well-spoken. He said he was in real estate, showed me pictures of expensive properties. I was naive. By the time I realized he might be lying, I was pregnant. He left when I confronted him about some suspicious paperwork in his briefcase. I never saw him again." Malik pressed. "Do you know if he had a criminal record?" "I don't know, but I remember he would get these calls late at night, and he never answered them around me. It was always in the other room, or he'd go outside. My gut told me something was off, but I was young and in love, and I ignored the warning signs." Silence stretched. Malik felt an odd mix of pity for his mother and anger toward this man. "Mom, do you think he's alive?" She sighed. "I have no idea. I used to dream he'd come back, say it was all a misunderstanding. Then, when you were born, I prayed he'd show up at the hospital. He never did." Malik closed his eyes. "I'm sorry you went through that." Her voice softened. "You have nothing to apologize for. I'm just sorry you have to pick up the pieces now. I love you, Malik. Please be careful. I'll support you, but I don't want to see you hurt." He blinked back tears. "Thank you, Mom. I love you too." They ended the call with a tender exchange of goodbyes. Malik set the phone down, feeling emotionally wrung out. He recalled Miss Stanton's suspicious gaze and the feeling of not being believed. Now, he understood that it wasn't just about an airline's protocol. It was a reflection of how some people viewed him, incomplete or untrustworthy without a father figure. A surge of determination gripped him again. He wanted to prove, maybe just to himself, that he had the right to exist without prejudice or question. He also thought about Miss Stanton's face, about how quick she was to assume something criminal or deceptive about him. He couldn't help linking it to the broader reality of racism. How many other kids were yanked off flights simply for looking out of place? The question burned in his mind. He felt a wave of empathy for anyone who'd faced discrimination. And in that swirl of anger and compassion, he realized that finding his father was about more than personal closure. It was also about asserting his identity in a world that questioned him. Over the next week, Malik continued his search, calling local real estate offices, combing through any references to a Patrick Slater. He even found a retired agent who claimed to recall the name from a decade earlier. According to this agent, Patrick Slater had shown interest in buying multiple properties, but his financing fell through. The agent suspected he was a front for someone else's money laundering scheme, though he had no proof. He only remembered that Slater vanished as soon as it looked like the deals would be scrutinized. Malik shared this development with Naomi at the library, who listened, intrigued. "Sounds like your father was involved in something illegal," she said softly. "That doesn't mean he's a bad person through and through, but it might explain why he left." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of that possibility. If he was running away from trouble, he might still be on the run, or who knows. Naomi offered a supportive smile. "Sometimes people do terrible things, but they can still change. You never know." Her words gave Malik a small flicker of hope. Maybe, if he ever did find Patrick Slater, the man might regret his past choices. Maybe he'd want to make amends. That night, he confided in his grandmother about the possibility of contacting private investigators or using online ancestry sites. The cost was intimidating, but his grandmother patted his shoulder, telling him they would figure something out. In the meantime, news of the fiasco at Westbound Airlines Yasson reached local activists. One day, a journalist called the house, introducing herself as Carmen Lewis. She said she was investigating claims of racial discrimination in airline travel and had come across Malik's story. His grandmother cautiously agreed to let Carmen speak to Malik. When Carmen arrived, a confident woman in her early 30s wearing a press badge, Malik felt both nervous and validated. She asked him to recount what had happened with Ms. Stanton. He told her everything, from the moment he boarded to the humiliating walk off the plane. Carmen took copious notes, her expression growing grim. "I've spoken to other people who reported similar instances of discrimination on flights," she said. "Sometimes the staff claim it's protocol, but it seems the protocol is unevenly applied. We're putting together a story on it." Malik's grandmother, sitting at his side, interjected. "I don't want my grandson exploited," she said firmly. "He's been through enough, but if telling his story can help others, we'll consider it." Carmen nodded. "Of course, we handle all interviews with respect. If you agree to be part of the piece, it could shed light on what happened. It might force the airline to reevaluate its practices." Malik thought about it. The idea of going public with his story made his stomach churn. Yet the memory of Ms. Stanton's cold eyes galvanized him. Maybe by speaking out, he could prevent someone else from experiencing the same prejudice. He looked at his grandmother and gave a determined nod. They scheduled an interview for the following week. Carmen would film it for an online news segment. Until then, Malik tried to prepare himself emotionally. He knew that public attention could bring critics as well as supporters. And a small secret part of him wondered if, by going public, his father might see the story, wherever he was, and realize the son he abandoned was still out there searching for him. The day of the interview, Carmen set up a small camera in the living room. She tested the microphone, then asked Malik to speak about the flight incident. Malik stared into the camera lens and began, voice trembling at first. He described the suspicious glances, the feeling of being singled out, the humiliating moment he was escorted off the plane. Carmen urged him to share how it made him feel. He admitted he felt powerless and ashamed. He also touched on the bigger issue of not having a father, how that missing detail suddenly became ammunition for the airline to question his legitimacy. "It's not fair," he said, voice gaining strength. "People come from all kinds of families, and I shouldn't have to prove I'm worthy of a seat just because my dad isn't around." Carmen gave him a sympathetic nod. When the interview ended, she turned off the camera and thanked him. "This is going to open some eyes," she said. "I'll keep you updated on when the story goes live." After she left, Malik sank into a chair, emotionally drained. His grandmother brought him a glass of water. "You did well," she said quietly. "I'm proud of you." He offered a wobbly smile. "I just hope it helps someone." In the following days, Malik continued his father hunt, feeling more resolute than ever. One afternoon, Naomi texted him a link. She'd found a tip online. Someone in a neighboring city had posted about a man named Patrick Slater, who once claimed to be a private investor. The post was from years ago, on a forum about scam alerts. Malik's pulse raced as he read it. The user wrote that they met Patrick Slater through a friend, that Slater promised quick returns on real estate investments, then vanished with the initial deposit. Heart pounding, Malik emailed the user who made the post, hoping they might still check that old account. Days went by. No response. Just when he was about to give up, a new email appeared in his inbox. It read, "Yes, I remember Slater. He scammed me out of $5,000. I heard he moved down south, possibly changed his name. That's all I know. Good luck." Malik stared at the screen, frustration mounting. It was still a lead, a possible direction to search. But down south was so vague. The thread was old, so no one else had commented. He tried not to let despair overcome him. He began noticing subtle changes in his grandmother's demeanor, as if she was worried he might do something reckless to find his father. She urged him to think carefully about continuing the search, but he insisted he needed answers. And so, they reached a compromise. If they didn't find concrete leads by the end of the summer, he would let it rest for a while, focus on school, and maybe revisit the search when he was older. At the same time, Carmen's news segment aired online, quickly gaining traction. Soon, local newspapers picked up the story. Teen claims racial bias by airline. Some online commenters showed support. Others were hostile. Malik tried not to read the negative ones, but occasionally a hurtful remark slipped past. Comments questioning his story, labeling him a liar, or attacking him for playing the race card made him furious. It was a taste of the ugliness the world sometimes spewed. Still, positive messages poured in as well. People praised him for speaking up. Others shared their own experiences of airline discrimination. Malik felt overwhelmed by how many had endured similar indignities. Then, one day, a letter arrived at his grandmother's mailbox. The envelope was plain, the address typed, no return name, just a postmark from a city several states away. Malik opened it, heart pounding at the possibility it might be from his father. The letter was typed as well. "I saw your interview. I think I know who your father is. His real name might not be Patrick Slater. He once went by Andrew Slade. I can't say more, but if you want to learn about him, search for Andrew Slade in Tampa, Florida." Malik's breath caught. The note was unsigned. His grandmother read it over his shoulder, eyes wide. "This is getting complicated," she whispered. But Malik felt a crackling excitement. Andrew Slade? Another alias? If it was the same man, maybe that was the breakthrough he needed. He showed the letter to Naomi, who helped him dig online for any Andrew Slade in Tampa. There were multiple possibilities. After hours of cross-checking addresses, they found a record for an Andrew Slade with a birth date that could match the approximate age of Patrick Slater. This Andrew Slade had a real estate license suspended in Florida a decade ago. The timeline roughly aligned with Malik's birth. It felt like the puzzle pieces were inching closer together. But traveling to Tampa was another matter entirely. Malik was still a minor. School would start soon, and he lived with his mother in a different state. Yet the pull to find answers only grew stronger. When he shared the letter with his mother over a video call, she looked alarmed. "Malik, do you really want to chase him down in Florida? We don't even know if it's the same man." He stared at her, expression resolute. "I need to try, Mom, or I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." His mother cast a worried glance at Grandma, who simply nodded, understanding that the truth was unstoppable at this point. "I'm not letting you go by yourself," his mother declared at last. "If we do this, we do it together." Malik's heart fluttered. Did this mean she was finally going to help him find his father? He saw hesitation in her eyes, but also a flicker of determination. Maybe she realized that burying the past wouldn't protect Malik anymore. School was approaching fast, and Malik's mother could only take so much time off work. So they decided to wait for a scheduled school break, then plan a trip to Tampa. In the meantime, Carmen's story garnered more attention. A talk show even invited Malik to speak about airline discrimination. He hesitated, but ultimately agreed, thinking it might help highlight the issue on a larger platform. On the day of the talk show, he traveled with his grandmother and mother to the TV studio. They sat in a backstage waiting area, nerves jangling. The show's producer explained how the interview would go. When Malik walked on set under bright lights and applause, his pulse hammered so loudly he could barely hear. The host, a charismatic man in his 40s, welcomed him, praising his courage for speaking out. Malik recounted the airport incident, trying not to flinch at the memory. He noticed the cameras panning to the audience, where some people nodded sympathetically. Others wore skeptical expressions. The host asked about the aftermath. Malik explained how he decided to search for his father, partly inspired by the humiliations he'd faced. That's when the conversation turned unexpected. The host said, "We reached out to Westbound Airlines for a statement. They claim there were irregularities with your paperwork and that they do not discriminate against anyone. How do you respond?" Malik took a breath, feeling the old anger rise. If it was about paperwork alone, it could have been handled discreetly. I was treated like a criminal, singled out in front of everyone. It wasn't just about a missing father's name. The audience murmured. The host nodded, letting Malik's words sink in. Then, with a theatrical flair, the host said, "We have a surprise for you. Someone reached out to our producers with information about your father." Malik's heart nearly stopped. He exchanged a wide-eyed look with his mother, who sat off stage with an equally stunned expression. The host gestured to the backstage curtains. "Please welcome our next guest." A man stepped onto the stage, tall, broad shoulders, wearing a neatly pressed shirt and a nervous expression. The audience gasped. Malik couldn't breathe. His eyes locked on the man's face, trying to see if there was any resemblance. But something felt off. The man looked older, with a salt and pepper beard, skin about the same shade as Malik's own. He walked forward tentatively. The host turned to Malik. "This is William Slater. He claims to be your father's brother. He reached out after seeing your story." Malik felt dizzy. Father's brother? He shot a glance at his mother, who looked utterly astonished. William cleared his throat. "I'm not sure if Patrick Slater is the same man as my brother, but the details match. My brother Andrew disappeared years ago, used multiple aliases. If you're his son, then you're my nephew." The audience fell silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Malik stared at William, trying to grasp the gravity of his words. Could this be real, or just another dead end? When he finally found his voice, he managed, "How do I know you're telling the truth?" William's eyes were filled with what appeared to be genuine regret. "I can only tell you what I know. Andrew, my brother, ran away from our hometown after some legal trouble. He mentioned being involved with a girl who got pregnant. That was around 15 years ago. I lost track of him. I've tried to find him, but he covered his tracks well." Malik felt his knees weaken, barely able to stand. "So you think I might be that baby?" he whispered. William gave a sad nod. "If so, I want to help you. I want to do what my brother never did and offer you a connection to your family." The host quickly ushered them to sit, presumably sensing the emotional weight of the moment. Malik's mother joined them on stage, face pale. She stared at William, eyes brimming with tears. "Is your brother's name Andrew Slade or Patrick Slater?" she asked carefully. William sighed. He was born Andrew Slade. He changed his last name to Slater. Then he changed his first name to Patrick for certain business dealings. He's used multiple variations. Malik's mother clenched her fists. "Why would he do that?" William hesitated. Because he was in trouble with the law, fraud mostly, some real estate scams. He borrowed money he couldn't repay. Then he vanished. The host interjected softly. "This is very intense. We understand if you need a moment. But William, if you are indeed Malik's uncle, do you have any idea where Andrew might be now?" William shook his head, his gaze filled with regret. "No. I've been looking for him for years, trying to get him to face the consequences of his actions. He owes a lot of people, including me. Our parents died never knowing where he went." Tears welled in Malik's eyes. He had spent so long trying to fill the emptiness of his father's absence, only to discover the man might be a fugitive. He felt a swirl of emotions: anger, sorrow, curiosity, relief that at least something was coming to light. "So, what does this mean for me?" he managed, voice trembling. William hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. He handed it to Malik. The photo showed two teenagers who looked alike. One clearly William, the other presumably Andrew. Andrew had the same dark eyes as Malik, the same cheekbones. Malik's breath caught. He recognized parts of himself in that photograph. "Where did you get this?" his mother asked, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's from our old family album," William replied. "I just want Malik to know he does have family that cares about him. Even if my brother is lost, we're not all gone." Malik felt overwhelmed, tears burning in his eyes. The cameras were still rolling, capturing this raw reunion. The host cleared his throat, looking on with a solemn expression. "We have to take a break," he said gently, "but we'll be right back." The stage lights dimmed. Production assistants guided them off stage to a private room, giving them a moment of privacy. Malik clutched the photograph, mind spinning. His mother, standing beside him, stared at William as though half expecting him to vanish. William spoke quietly. "I'm sorry to do this so publicly, but when I saw your story, I felt compelled to come forward. I've been searching for Andrew for years. Your interview gave me hope that maybe, through you, I could find him." Malik studied William's face, searching for deception. He found only a haunted sadness. He thought of how the simplest step, boarding a plane, had led him to this earth-shaking revelation. Life was strange that way, weaving heartbreak into possibility. His mother wiped her cheeks, regaining some composure. "So, if Andrew is your brother, that makes you Malik's uncle. And you're telling me Andrew was likely using a fake name when we met. He never said anything about having a family." William exhaled shakily. "Andrew cut himself off from us. He was running from mistakes. I wanted to help him, but he wouldn't let me. Then he disappeared entirely." Malik looked down at the photograph again, studying the young face of the man who might be his father. The swirl of rage, longing, curiosity, and heartbreak was almost too much. "Do you have any idea how we can find him?" he asked William quietly. A flicker of regret passed over William's face. "Honestly, no. The last rumor I heard placed him in Texas, but that was years ago. For all I know, he could be overseas. I'm sorry, I don't have answers." Malik's grandmother, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "You have the potential to build a relationship with your nephew, even if your brother is lost," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "Malik deserves some family ties." William nodded earnestly. "I'd like that very much. If you'll have me, we can do a DNA test to confirm for sure if Andrew is his father. I'm willing to pay for it." Malik's mother exchanged a look with Grandma. The weight of the decision hung in the air. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said. "We'll do it. I don't want Malik to face more disappointment, but if this is real, then we need to know." They agreed to keep in touch, to coordinate the DNA test quietly, away from the prying eyes of the media. The show's producer knocked gently on the door, letting them know they could return if they wished to continue on air. Malik looked at his mother, silently asking for guidance. She squeezed his hand. "We've said enough for television," she whispered. "Let's handle the rest privately." William politely excused himself, understanding the moment's intensity. "I'll be staying in town for a few days. Please call me if you have any questions." He handed them a business card. Malik's hand shook slightly as he took it. William gave him a hopeful smile before disappearing down the corridor, escorted by the show's staff. A car waited to take Malik, his mother, and grandmother back to their hotel. The ride was silent. Malik's mind was a tempest. He leaned his forehead against the window, watching city lights blur. The father he never knew might be a man with multiple aliases fleeing from one scam to the next. Yet Malik felt a tiny ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, Andrew Slade or Patrick Slater could be found and held accountable for the life he'd left behind. At the hotel, Malik's mother sank onto the bed. "This is a lot," she murmured, looking at him. "How are you holding up?" He sank down beside her. I don't know. Part of me is angry. Part of me is relieved. I have an uncle? That's wild." She nodded. "It is. I'm stunned myself." His grandmother, sitting by the window, sighed heavily. "We'll take it day by day. At least we have a new piece of the puzzle." In the morning, they headed home, exhausted. Over the next week, William arranged for a DNA kit to be sent. Malik spat into a test tube, sealed it, and shipped it off, feeling like he was teetering on the edge of a massive revelation. While waiting for the results, he tried to live life as normally as possible, preparing for the new school year, hanging out with Naomi at the library, quietly working through the sense of betrayal and curiosity that gnawed at him. Carmen's news story about airline discrimination continued to circulate, and Westbound Airlines eventually reached out to Malik with a half-hearted apology, offering travel vouchers for future flights. He felt no satisfaction from it, though it was a small acknowledgement that they had mishandled things. Finally, the DNA results arrived. Malik opened the email with trembling hands. 99.8% chance he and William Slater were related as nephew and uncle. He stared at the screen, tears prickling his eyes. His mother, reading over his shoulder, let out a shaky breath. "So it's true," she whispered. "Andrew Slade, Patrick Slater, is your father." A swirl of emotions flooded Malik. Triumph at finally having proof, sadness at confirming his father's deceptions, but also a strange sense of peace. At least now, the question of his paternity was resolved. He had an uncle who seemed willing to be part of his life. That was more than he ever expected. They arranged to meet William again. This time, it was in a quieter setting, a small cafe near Malik's grandmother's house. Malik's mother insisted on going along. She was wary, unsure of William's motives, but recognized that if he was telling the truth, he deserved some trust. William arrived early, sitting at a corner table. When they joined him, he rose and greeted them warmly, hugging Malik awkwardly but sincerely. "I'm glad the test confirmed it," William said, voice thick with emotion. I spent years feeling guilty for not being able to help my brother, for not knowing he had a child out there. Now at least I can be here for you." Malik looked into his eyes. "Thank you. I guess I have a million questions." William nodded, sipping his coffee. "I'll answer as best I can, but you have to understand, Andrew and I weren't close after he left. He'd been in trouble before, always chasing quick money. Our parents tried to set him straight, but he didn't listen." Malik's mother frowned. "He never told me about his family. Did he leave you all behind on purpose?" William shrugged, eyes filled with regret. "He was ashamed, or just didn't care. I don't know. When he ran, he severed ties with everyone. I spent so long searching for him, wondering if he was dead." They talked for hours, forging a fragile new bond. William showed them more family photos, images of grandparents Malik had never met. Old Christmas gatherings, a younger Andrew smiling. Malik studied each picture, searching for glimpses of himself in that man's face. He felt both disconnected from and entwined with this new reality. Eventually, William hesitated, then asked, "So, do you still want to find Andrew? I can help in any way I can." Malik and his mother exchanged a look. She spoke first, voice steady but cautious. "We do. We need to ask him why he left, why he never came back. We need some closure." William nodded grimly. "I have a few leads, old contacts who might have heard rumors. If you're up for it, we can start making inquiries." Thus began a series of phone calls, emails, and hours spent on the internet, sifting through scattered clues. One rumored sighting placed Andrew in Houston. Another claimed to have seen him in New Orleans. William chased each rumor, but they led to dead ends or conflicting information. Still, Malik refused to give up. The memory of being dragged off that plane fueled him. He deserved answers. No one would question his legitimacy again. As the new school year approached, Malik prepared to return home with his mother. They decided to continue the search remotely, staying in close contact with William. The night before they left his grandmother's, Malik confided in her, "All my life, I never knew anything about my father. Now I know too much, and not enough." His grandmother pulled him into a gentle hug. "We'll get there, baby. Just promise you'll never forget your worth, with or without him." Malik hugged her back, tears welling up. "I promise," he whispered. A few days later, they boarded a Westbound Airlines flight back home. A flight Malik approached with a swirl of anxiety, given the last time he set foot on one of their planes. His mother had insisted they speak to the airline in advance, ensuring no fiasco repeated. This time, the attendants were cordial, if a bit stiff. Malik settled into his seat, hand gripping his mother's. He couldn't help eyeing the flight staff warily, waiting for someone to accuse him of wrongdoing. But no one did. As the plane soared into the clouds, Malik leaned back, letting the hum of the engine soothe him. He was returning home with more questions, but also more hope than ever before. His father was out there, somewhere. His father had an entire family network Malik could tap into. And thanks to that humiliating incident, Malik found the resolve to uncover what had been hidden all those years. When they touched down, Malik vowed not to let the story end here. He had found an uncle who cared. He had found a name for his father. He had discovered a determination within himself to stand up to discrimination and to chase the truth, no matter how painful. He was no longer just a black boy kicked off a flight. He was a fighter, forging his own destiny, ready to face the world's biases and demands with unshakable resolve. And whether or not he ever found the man who had vanished from his life, Malik would continue forward, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to let prejudice or paternal absence define his path. Did you enjoy this story of ambition, courage, and the power of one voice to spark change? Let us know in the comments. What part resonated with you the most, or which character's journey surprised you? We love hearing your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this, full of twists, heart, and inspiration, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Not all days begin with a warning. Sometimes the most life-altering events start with something small, something so ordinary you never see it coming. That's how it was for him. Just another exhausting day, another errand to run before he could finally rest. But life has a way of turning the mundane into the extraordinary. When he saw the frail elderly woman struggling with her groceries, he didn't think twice. Helping her was just the right thing to do. But what he didn't realize in that moment was how that single act of kindness would change everything. A mysterious note slipped into his hand, a strange address at the edge of town, and secrets hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. This is just the beginning. If you think you're ready for what comes next, subscribe now. Trust me, you'll want to know how this story unfolds. The day felt like it would never end. After an exhausting shift at the warehouse, he dragged himself to the local grocery store, just wanting to grab a few things and get home. His feet ached and his head throbbed, but he pushed through the aisles, focused only on finishing the errand as quickly as possible. But as he approached the checkout line, something caught his eye. An elderly woman, small and hunched over, was struggling to lift a carton of milk from her cart. Her wrinkled hands trembled with the effort, and the bottle slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. She bent down, attempting to pick it up again, but her movements were slow, shaky. He didn't hesitate. Stepping forward, he crouched down and grabbed the carton, placing it back in her cart. "Here, ma'am, let me help you with that." She looked up, startled, her pale blue eyes wide. In this busy, indifferent city, people hardly noticed each other. Acts of kindness were rare. For a moment, she just stared at him, her mouth slightly open, as if trying to understand why he would bother helping her. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. He smiled, gave a quick nod, and turned to leave. But just as he did, she reached out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength for someone so frail. "Wait," she said, fumbling inside her old, tattered coat pocket. Her hand emerged, holding a small, crumpled piece of paper. She pressed it into his palm. "What's this?" he asked, confused. Her eyes held his for a moment, a strange intensity behind them. "You'll find out soon enough." Before he could respond, she turned and shuffled toward the checkout line, disappearing into the crowd. He stood there for a moment, the paper clutched in his hand, unsure of what had just happened. Shrugging it off as some eccentric gesture, he shoved the note into his jacket pocket and continued with his day. It wasn't until later, when he was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, that he remembered the note. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, unfolding the paper slowly. His brow furrowed as he stared at the message scrawled inside. 3 a.m. 149 Crawford Street. Bring nothing but yourself. His heart skipped a beat. The address was unfamiliar, and the time, 3 a.m., sent a shiver down his spine. What kind of message was this? A prank? A mistake? His mind raced with questions. Why would the old woman give him this? What could possibly be waiting for him at that address? He tried to brush it off, but the more he thought about it, the more it nagged at him. Something about it felt urgent. Compelled by an instinct he didn't understand, he set an alarm for 2:30 a.m. The streets were eerily quiet as he approached 149 Crawford Street in the dead of night. The house stood alone, dark and dilapidated, on a block of abandoned buildings. Its windows were boarded up, and ivy crawled up the weathered brick walls. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the wind. Every instinct told him to turn back, but he couldn't. His breath quickened as he approached the front door, which was slightly ajar, as if waiting for him. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder to see if anyone else was around. The street was empty. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent, save for the faint creaking of the old wooden floor beneath his feet. The air was thick with dust, and the furniture, covered in sheets, looked like it hadn't been touched in years. A faint smell of something metallic lingered in the air. As he moved deeper into the house, he noticed something odd. A faint glow coming from the end of the hallway. His curiosity pushed him forward, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. When he reached the source of the light, he found himself standing in front of a room lit by a single, flickering candle. And there, sitting in an armchair, was the old woman from the grocery store. "You came," she said, her voice no longer soft and frail but clear, almost commanding. He didn't respond, too stunned to speak. The scene felt unreal, like a dream. But the thudding of his heart reminded him this was no dream. "You must be wondering why you're here," she continued, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "And why I gave you that note." His mind spun with questions. He wanted to leave, but something in her gaze held him there. "Your act of kindness was no accident," she said. "I chose you, and now I need your help." He stepped back, unsure of what to say. "Help? With what?" She leaned forward in her chair, her face suddenly more serious. "There's something hidden here, something powerful, and only someone with a pure heart, like yours, can unlock it. You see, you've been part of something much bigger than you realize." His mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" "Underneath this house," she whispered, "lies a key. A key that unlocks something most people would never dare to seek. You're the one I've chosen to retrieve it." Without waiting for his reply, she stood, moving toward a door at the back of the room. She gestured for him to follow, and despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind, he found himself obeying. The door led to a staircase that descended into darkness. The old woman lit another candle and began the descent, her steps slow and deliberate. He followed, his skin crawling with unease. When they reached the bottom, they stood in front of an old wooden chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. She handed him a small key, its metal cold in his hand. "Open it," she commanded. His heart raced as he knelt before the chest. With trembling hands, he inserted the key into the lock and turned. The chest creaked open, revealing a strange, ancient-looking book. The pages were yellowed, the writing faint but legible. Symbols and languages he didn't recognize filled every page. "This book," she said, her voice now low and urgent, "holds secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. But now, it's time. It will change everything, but be warned. Once you've seen what's inside, there's no turning back." He stared at the book, fear and curiosity warring within him. He knew he should walk away, leave this all behind, but something held him there. Slowly, he reached out and touched the cover. The moment his fingers made contact, a wave of cold rushed through him, and the candlelight flickered wildly. "What? What is this?" he stammered, pulling his hand back. "It's more than just a book," the old woman whispered. "It's a doorway to knowledge, to power, to things you've never imagined. But it comes with a price." He stood up abruptly, backing away from the chest. "I didn't ask for any of this." The woman's eyes darkened. "No, but you were chosen for a reason. You helped me without expecting anything in return. That is why you're here." Just as he was about to argue, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the book suddenly sprang open on its own, pages flipping wildly as a gust of wind tore through the room. Symbols began to glow on the pages, casting eerie light onto the walls. "This is your fate now," she said, her voice almost drowned by the howling wind. "The choice is yours. Leave now, forget this ever happened, or take the book and unlock the truth." He looked between the glowing book and the old woman, his mind racing. Was this some kind of test? Could he really walk away and forget everything? But the pull of the unknown was too strong, the temptation to see what lay beyond too great. With one final glance at the woman, he stepped forward and reached for the book. As his fingers closed around it, the wind died down, and the room fell into an eerie silence. The symbols on the pages dimmed, but he could feel their power pulsing through him. "You've made your choice," the woman said quietly. "There's no going back now." He didn't respond. The weight of what he had just done settled over him like a heavy cloak. Whatever was in this book, whatever power or knowledge it held, was now his to bear. And deep down he knew this was only the beginning. Days passed, but life was no longer the same. Everywhere he went, he saw things he couldn't explain, shadows that moved on their own, symbols that appeared in places they shouldn't. The book was with him always, hidden but never far from his thoughts. And then, one evening, another note arrived at his door. "You're not the only one. They're coming." His heart pounded as he stared at the cryptic message. Who were they? What did they want? And how much danger was he really in? He had only scratched the surface of the mystery that had consumed his life. But one thing was certain. Whatever was coming next would be far more terrifying than anything he had imagined. Want to find out what happens next? Who's coming for him, and what will he uncover about the book? Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and don't miss the next part of this story. Trust me, things are about to get even stranger.